Good afternoon. The first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions, and the first portfolio is Deputy First Minister Responsibilities, Economy and Gaelic. Question number 1, I call Sharon Dowie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of the impact on business confidence and investment of non-domestic rates threshold having limited movement since 2020-21.
Minister Ivan McKee.
Annual decisions on non-domestic rates are made in the context of prevailing economic conditions and government priorities at the time. Our budget supports businesses with a decrease in all 3 non-domestic property rates, delivering the lowest basic property rate since 2018-19, and the reliefs package estimated to be worth £870 million in 26-27. Thriving businesses are key to Scotland's prosperity, and many factors such as UK Government increases in national insurance contributions have had significant impacts, contributing to reduced business confidence in Scotland. Engagement with businesses on non-domestic rates continues through the NDR Consultative Group.
Sharon Dowie.
Thank you. Businesses in critical distress in Scotland are rising faster than anywhere else in the United Kingdom, up over 80% in a single year. The Fraser of Allender Institute reports that every single one of its headline business confidence indicators has been negative for 5 consecutive quarters, and 15,000 fewer people are on Scottish business payrolls than a year ago. So the Minister stands to defend frozen rates thresholds that have barely moved in half a decade. Does he not see that this is part of a wider picture? An SNP government that squeezed businesses from every direction and is now watching them close.
Minister.
Well, as indicated, there are many factors impacting that, not least the UK Government's action on employers' national insurance contributions. But I'll just remind the member that Scotland continues to outperform the rest of the UK with attracting the most inward investment from any part compared to any part of the UK outside of London for I think 10 years in a row now, showing the confidence that businesses have in Scotland's economy. And with regards to non-domestic rates, it's important to recognise that the amount of revenue raised through non-domestic rates is now 6% lower than it was pre-COVID, despite there being more businesses in Scotland than there was at that point in time, showing that we've actually reduced the NDR burden on businesses over recent years.
Supplementary, Bill Kidd.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Minister, according to the Bank of Scotland Business Barometer, business confidence in Scotland has continued its upward trend as firms embrace new tech and innovation opportunities. Can I ask the Minister, therefore, how the Scottish Government is working to ensure this trend continues?
Minister.
Bill Kidd raised a very important point, the fact that Scotland's business confidence is continuing its upward trend on that measure. And while cost pressures remain, the fact that businesses plan to adjust shows a growing sense of confidence and a firmer footing for future investment. Business confidence in Scotland is closely linked to firms' ability to adopt new technologies and innovate, and the Scottish Government is actively working to ensure this positive trend continues. A key part of this is the TechSkills programme, now in its 4th year, which provides a national platform that supports the creation, development and scaling of tech start-ups across Scotland. And we've also transformed the investment landscape in Scotland to make Scotland more attractive to investment, creating jobs in our communities.
Question number 2, Paul O'Kane.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to support high streets and town centres in the West Scotland region in light of reported issues, including high vacancy rates.
Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes.
Well, I recognise many of our towns face challenges with vacant buildings, and that's why we're continuing our long-standing commitment to regeneration, with investment of up to £52 million for the next financial year. Since 2014, we've provided almost £169 million of capital regeneration investment for local authorities within the West Scotland region, some of which has supported town centre revitalisation through the transformation of empty properties and enabling community ownership. There is also support for local authorities to address vacant retail spaces with a non-domestic rates relief package and 2 particular schemes, Fresh Start and the Business Growth Accelerator reliefs, that support the reuse or for the repurposing of vacant properties.
Paula Keane.
Can I thank the Deputy First Minister for that answer, and in doing so acknowledge that this will be her last portfolio questions, and wish her be an accolade for the future. In towns and villages across communities such as Johnston, scores of people have raised with me their sadness about the state of their high street, whether that's the lack of upkeep and investment, insufficient public transport to access the high street, or reduced activity on them. In Renfrewshire, the town centre vacancy rate is 19% in 24-25, meaning almost 1 in 5 units are sitting empty. And successive SNP ministers, including one who represents the town affected, have failed to grip this issue and support our streets. And they're going to be hammered again by inaction on business rates that in many cases are doubling or trebling. So can I ask the Deputy First Minister, has the Government done any analysis of the impact of those increases on business closures, vacancy rates, and what will that do to the streets? And could she not look again at pausing the process?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, this is definitely an issue of concern to us, and we've looked at a number of different options to try and resolve the issues of empty properties, which are largely driven by a change in trading conditions and the fact that people are increasingly choosing to shop online rather than locally. Back in 2025, we consulted on permitted development rights and compulsory purchase reform, both key issues that impact upon town centre regeneration and, more importantly, the reuse of vacant and unused buildings. We're currently analysing the responses to inform next steps, and that analysis will be published in due course. I think we can also learn from examples where councils have taken alternative approaches. So Aberdeen, where the Council and Local Business Improvement District have led award-winning work to bring upper floor premises on Union Street back into use. And I mentioned in my opening answer about the different reliefs that we have available, Fresh Start and Business Growth Accelerator relief, which specifically give non-domestic rates relief for tenants or for owners that are purchasing or moving into properties that were previously unused.
Supplementary, Pam Gozo.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Businesses in my West of Scotland region are under immense pressure, no thanks to increased employer national insurance contribution from the UK Labour Government, a failure of the SNP Scottish Government to fully pass down the rates relief, and an ever-increasing retail crime. It is little wonder that so many small businesses are being forced to shut down and removing jobs and livelihoods. So does the Deputy First Minister agree that more taxes and regulations will only lead to more vacancies on our high streets and town centres?
Well, that's of course why we have the most generous rates relief anywhere in the UK, including some of the most ambitious support through the Small Business Bonus Scheme. And the member will know that a lot of the properties on our town centre high streets are indeed beneficiaries of the Small Business Bonus Scheme. We have got some other initiatives in place to provide support to businesses. But I do think on an issue like this, we need to understand what the key drivers are, and predominantly that is a change in trading conditions and change in trading behaviour, which means that more people are choosing to shop online rather than in person.
Question number 3, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to expand the availability of venture capital funding to aid business growth.
Deputy First Minister.
Well, this is a really important question because expanding the access to private investment is a critical element in seeing Scotland grow. Scotland has a strong public sector investment ecosystem, with our enterprise agencies and the bank focused on investing alongside private investment to achieve the best outcomes for Scottish businesses. And since its launch in 2020, the bank has committed over £1 billion in investment, which has importantly leveraged £1.7 billion in investment from the private sector. What I have seen is that where there is a density of investable propositions, it attracts increasing levels of venture capital.
Murdo Fraser.
The Deputy First Minister for that response. And as this might well be, I suspect, our last ever exchange in this chamber, can I wish her all the best for the future and say much I've enjoyed our constructive engagement over a number of years. And on that note, I wonder if she would agree with me in terms of what I'm about to say, because we do see an issue with start-ups looking to grow who struggle to get venture capital to move to the next stage. And there is a lack of availability of venture capital in Scotland, and that is because there's a lack of venture capitalists in Scotland. What we need to be doing is attracting more venture capitalists to come here and invest. And we should therefore agree with me that, contrary to what the Green Party say, who I notice are boycotting this particular session on the economy. Not perhaps surprisingly. We don't need to be driving billionaires out of Scotland. We need to be attracting more billionaires into Scotland with their investment to support our economic growth. Does she agree?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I do agree that attracting a varied and diverse range of investors able to meet the needs of companies across all projects and stages is vital. And what we have seen is a huge growth in start-ups, and now the focus needs to turn to scale-ups. And there are a number of innovative private sector equity investors active in Scotland, which have sometimes been able to complete investment deals in part due to support from public bodies, so you can't completely exclude that from the equation. But we have also seen the average VC fund size increase significantly in recent years, particularly among US-based VC investors, meaning that the highest publicity VC investors in deals are operating on a larger scale than the Scottish business investment market. So I think the point here is that our focus is on scaling businesses. They will attract investment from a range of sources. The critical element is that they don't leave Scotland. And if they can't attract the investment whilst headquartered in Scotland, that becomes a risk. But as I said in my opening remarks, I've always thought that the right approach is to build up that density of investable businesses, which naturally attracts capital, rather than to focus in on the capital initially in the hope that they have investment propositions as a result.
Question number 4, Stephen Kerr.
To ask the Scottish Government what further support provisions will be available to Alexander Dennis following the expiration of the current £4 million support package this month.
Deputy First Minister.
Well, we continue to work closely with Alexander Dennis following our award of a time-limited company furlough scheme designed to retain jobs in the firm's manufacturing capacity in Scotland. The agreed terms and conditions of the grant require the business to provide the necessary evidence to access that support. Yesterday, we accepted in principle a formal furlough extension request from the company, and we stand ready to discuss all possible options beyond that. I spoke with the company yesterday and I reiterated the government's full commitment to continue to do everything we possibly can to protect these skilled jobs and bus manufacturing here in Scotland.
Stephen Kerr.
Well, I'd like to thank the Deputy First Minister for that response and also for that very important update that she's just given. Now, it says on the order paper for today's questions that I have a registered interest in this area. I don't think I do. I think it's a mistake. But the registered interest I definitely have, and I wish to register it with everyone, is in those jobs, those highly skilled jobs in Larbert and Falkirk, which we should retain. Now, Scott ZEB 3, I think, is the real test of the Scottish Government's claims on social value, because there's £45 million of public funding that's about to be allocated. So will the Deputy First Minister confirm that not a single pound of taxpayers' money will go towards Chinese-built buses, and that that funding will support Scottish jobs and Scottish manufacturing?
Deputy First Minister.
It's important for me to say at the outset, because I have a declaration of interest to make in that my primary responsibility when answering these questions is to Alexander Dennis, and I have no role at all in Scott ZEB 3 for very important proprietary reasons. When it comes to Scott ZEB 3, that is led by the Transport Secretary, because Transport Scotland is the procuring authority, as it were. They have made the decision to extend the Scott ZEB 2 programme, and it will be for the Transport Secretary to announce the conclusions and the outcomes of Scott ZEB 3, which opened for applications on the 5th of December. So I appreciate that question will be disappointing to Stephen Kerr, who wants something a bit more robust, but I hope he appreciates that it's critical that I am kept at arm's length from the Scott ZEB 3 process.
Supplementary, Richard Leonard.
Can I remind members of my voluntary register of trade union interests, and can I pay tribute to Kate Forbes, who in my view has been a breath of fresh air as an active and interventionist Cabinet Secretary for the Economy. Yesterday, another vehicle manufacturer in central Scotland, Volvo Construction Equipment, announced plans to close its factory near Holytown. Will the Deputy First Minister respect the fact that there will now be a statutory redundancy consultation with trade unions to consider options for averting closure and avoiding redundancies altogether? And in that spirit, will the Government urgently meet with the GMB and with the company to consider how these 120 highly skilled jobs can be saved?
Deputy First Minister.
I am very thankful for Richard Leonard's kind words. I was always almost dreading that something coming afterwards, but I think I'm very grateful for those comments. And in terms of the issue, it's a very serious issue. I had a call with the GMB this morning. It was intentionally about another issue, but we spent some time at the end of that call talking about the Volvo situation. And I also have a very helpful letter from the GMB in this morning about it. So I committed this morning to the GMB in that call to engage thoroughly and quickly on this very serious issue, because I understand what the consequences will be to that community.
And brief supplementary, Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Deputy First Minister. I also want to wish the Deputy First Minister well in her future journey. And we actually crossed paths as children, apparently. So it does give rise to the fact that as we stayed in the same street, Scotland does seem to be a village at times. But I want to ask the Deputy First Minister about the 10-year zero-emission bus order pipeline that was announced by the UK Government this week, 23,000 projected buses, and the potential deficiencies in the ScotZEB scheme. It's a subsidy scheme that's limited. It can't be directed to UK manufacturers. Could have been an alternative model worth looking at the Scottish Government through direct purchasing and then leasing, so that could allow for direct awards to Scottish manufacturers?
Deputy First Minister.
It's a very interesting point. I thank the member too for his kind comments. It's a very interesting approach. We have looked very carefully at all approaches that we could take through procurement and grants to support, for example, domestic manufacturing at Alexander Dennis. And they were always clear that it couldn't just be a reliance on Scottish buses that would get them through these difficult times. It had to be UK-wide. So we do welcome commitments to procure buses. There has been a big challenge in terms of the increase in market share of international bus manufacturing and those procurement processes, which I think was what Stephen Kerr was alluding to as well. We haven't seen sufficient progress, I don't think, on some of that, because it is still putting at risk Scottish domestic manufacturing. But we will look at all of this and see if there are lessons that we can learn for our approach as well.
Question number 5, Jamie Hawkins-Johnson.
To ask the Scottish Government what support it's providing to businesses facing higher energy prices and other increased costs resulting from the conflict in the Middle East.
Minister Richard Lockhead.
Ministers are deeply concerned about the impact of the conflict in the Middle East, and both the Energy Secretary and Housing Secretary have made representations to the UK Government on energy costs. We're obviously hopeful that any de-escalation can reverse the higher energy prices and other increased costs faced by businesses. We were also disappointed that the UK Government's financial support announced on Monday did not extend to businesses. We will, however, continue to work with companies to create better certainty and stability for businesses where we can. This includes the investment of £326 million for enterprise agencies in the budget, and our package referred to earlier of non-domestic rates relief worth an estimated £870 million as well.
Jamie Hawkins-Johnson.
Thank the Minister for that. While £10 million is going to support 71 businesses in Glasgow impacted of fire there are thousands of businesses across the Highlands and Islands who will be seeing fuel costs double, with apparently no support coming. So can I ask the Minister, is there going to be specific support for those businesses across the Highlands and Islands, across Scotland, particularly in our rural areas, that are reliant on oil, who are massively impacted already by this and who already pay higher costs for their oil?
Minister.
Well, the member raises a serious issue that's impacting on businesses in Scotland, and of course we share his concerns. As I indicated earlier, these issues are largely reserved to the UK Government in terms of energy costs. We will continue to do all we can to help, and the member may be aware we also fund Business Energy Scotland, for instance, to give advice to businesses, and over £200 million worth of savings for businesses have been identified by that initiative since we launched it. and on average save 24% in the cost of energy bills for those businesses to take advantage of that advice service. So I'd encourage members to share information about that advisory service to businesses affected by high energy bills. But we will, of course, continue to do all we can to support businesses, but this is largely the responsibility of the UK Government in terms of energy policy, and as if they're giving some support to households, very limited support, they should also be extending that support to businesses.
Supplementary, Emma Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Defence experts in the recent Renewable UK report have urged an acceleration of renewables development to shield against further geopolitical shocks. Does the Minister agree that it's more important than ever for Scotland to develop renewable regeneration and storage capacity to enhance our energy security for businesses and households across Scotland?
Minister.
Emma Roddick raises a really important issue, of course. It's ironic that in energy-rich Scotland we are facing these rising energy bills because, as the member refers to, we don't have enough measures in place to shield Scotland and to make sure we can take advantage of our own massive energy resources, particularly renewable energy resources, on our own doorstep. So I absolutely agree that we do have to accelerate that in terms of grid connections and other projects that are waiting for the green light. That's, of course, in the hands of the UK Government, and we have to ensure that that's expedited as much as possible so we can make sure we've got energy available to Scotland for our business community in the Highlands and Islands and the rest of the country.
Supplementary, Willie Rennie.
Can I join others in paying tribute to Kate Forbes as she leaves this chamber? She was cheered on by Richard Leonard and the Conservatives, but silence from the SNP benches. I don't know if that tells us anything at all, but we are, however, paying the price of Donald Trump's folly of a decision to bomb Iran, and we're now paying the price of that, cheered on by the Conservative Party as well. But my particular concern, and I hope the Minister will take this on board, is to the fishing industry. They are facing significant increases in their bills for running their fishing boats. And I hope when the Minister speaks to the UK Government that those representations are made strongly, because the sector is already under quite a bit of strain.
Minister.
I'll make sure I convey Willie Rennie's comments to Mary Goujon, the Cabinet Secretary, who often discusses these issues with our UK counterparts. And as a former fishing minister, I know very well how over the years the cost of fuels fluctuated and caused particular challenges for Scotland's fishing fleets. And we, of course, continue to pay close attention to that. And I, of course, want to associate myself with members' comments about my colleague, the Deputy First Minister, Kate Forbes, given this is our last question time, and commend her contribution to public service in the Scottish Parliament. And of course, I also am leaving and will be joining her in post-politics life. But I don't take any offence from Willie Rennie not mentioning that.
Question number 6, Oliver Medell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action is taking to support Dumfries Town Centre.
Deputy First Minister.
Well, we continue to deliver on our long-standing commitment to regeneration, as I outlined in a previous answer, with investment of up to £52 million next year. It has long been a commitment of mine to support local regeneration, which is why we have worked hard to safeguard that capital investment, because it supports the revitalisation of our towns and our town centres. And that is one of the ways that we have supported Dumfries Town Centre alongside other forms of support. Since 2014, Dumfries and Galloway Council has received nearly £21.5 million in regeneration capital funding, including £4.5 million for the award-winning Mid-Steeple Quarter, which has revitalised a previously vacant town centre building into a community event, an enterprise space and 7 homes.
Oliver Medell.
Thank the Deputy First Minister for that answer, and I would like to associate myself with colleagues' comments from across the chamber. But I am concerned that SNP-led Dumfries and Galloway Council is undoing all of that hard work by continuing with its obsession with wasting £70 million of taxpayers' money on the deeply unpopular White Sands flood scheme. This will see vital town centre parking removed and the setting of the River Nith diminished. Surely this money could be better spent maintaining vital local services and improving the upkeep of the town centre.
Deputy First Minister.
I'm aware of the White Sands Flood Protection Scheme, and obviously its purpose is to combine major flood defences with significant public realm improvements. That's set to start this spring after receiving approval by Dumfries and Galloway Council. I'm aware of the members' concerns. However, there are issues here in terms of reducing flood risk and enhancing recreation and active travel opportunities. It is ultimately, as I understand it, a decision that has been made by the local council, and so therefore I think those comments should be directed to representatives of the local authority. And if I could just take the opportunity, Presiding Officer, because this is my last planned comment in the chamber before I leave to be as an MSP, can I take a brief moment to thank from the depths of my heart everybody who has enabled me to serve our country and the communities of Skye, Lochaber and Badenoch over the last 10 years. That includes the staff and officials of the Parliament and Government, colleagues who've become friends across the chamber, and everybody with an interest in the decisions that we make in this chamber. I feel like I've squeezed multiple lifetimes into the last 10 years, and I certainly barely recognise the young woman who was elected, aged 26, to represent the constituency of Skye, Lochaber and Badenoch 10 years ago. But above all else, I have always enjoyed intelligent debate, good-natured disagreement, constructive engagement, and sometimes I've even been able to make a difference. So I leave with enormous respect for our colleagues across the chamber, many of whom argue their case robustly but with respect and wisdom. Our democracy relies on debate. Debate requires at least two people who disagree, and disagreement does not require bitterness, animosity or malice. I hope the next Parliament can exemplify the joy of dispute and debate in the service of our constituents. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy First Minister. But I could squeeze in question 7 if I get a brief question and a brief supplementary. Question 7, Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government for what reason, despite an increase in the number of businesses pledging to pay the real living wage, the percentage of people actually being paid the real living wage or more has been decreasing for 3 consecutive years.
Minister.
Well, key powers over employment law remain reserved to the UK Government, including on the minimum wage. We have made significant progress towards our ambitious goal of becoming a leading fair work nation, and around 88.7% of Scottish employees over 18 years of age are paid the real living wage or above, the highest of the UK countries, and the share of Scottish employees paid the real living wage or above was slightly lower in 2025 than in 2023. Of course, this has also happened in other parts of the UK, reflecting a range of national and international pressures and costs in recent years.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the Minister for that answer. Nobody on these benches opposes fair pay for workers, but the Minister must recognise that the gap between the accredited employees and workers actually receiving the real living wage tells us a story. Businesses in Scotland are closing, relocating or simply not starting up because of the government has created a hostile environment to enterprise. Continually making feel-good announcements makes absolutely no difference. So what action will the Scottish Government take to protect these businesses which are disappearing on a daily basis across our communities?
Minister.
Well, as we've discussed in previous answers, there are a number of pressures facing businesses in Scotland, not least rising national insurance contributions, which are the responsibility of the UK Government, not the Scottish Government, and rising energy costs, which are the responsibility of the UK Government, not the Scottish Government. But we are continuing to do all we can to support businesses against that tough backdrop. And there are 2.45 million people payrolled in Scotland at the moment. That may be a slight decrease in the previous year, given some of these factors we've discussed, but compared to historical records, that's actually quite high. And of course, unemployment rates in Scotland are lower than the rest of the UK as well. We should not forget that, notwithstanding the other successes we have in attracting inward investment to Scotland, which has created high-value jobs in our country as well. So the Scottish economy is resilient, but of course we are not immune to those pressures, and a number of businesses are facing very tough times, and we will continue to do all we can to help them.
Thank you. Question 8 has not been lodged, and that therefore concludes portfolio questions on Deputy First Minister's responsibilities, economy and Gaelic. We'll move swiftly on to the next portfolio, which is finance and local government. And at question number 1, I call Gillian Mackay. Ms Mackay is joining us remotely.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will introduce a licensing system for local authorities to address the growing number of vaping shops.
Minister Ivan McKee.
Scotland is the only country in the UK with a tobacco and vapes retail register, and all businesses, regardless of size, need to be registered to be able to sell these products in Scotland. The register exists to support the enforcement of regulation on age-restricted products, given the public health harms of tobacco and vaping. Individual business owners are responsible for registering any business selling tobacco and/or vapes. Failure to do so could result in a fine of up to £20,000 and possible imprisonment not exceeding 6 months. It is the responsibility of local authorities to enforce compliance with the register in their local area. We remain committed to considering how the register could be improved, including possible further conditions on registration to support our public health aims of reducing the use of tobacco and vapes.
Gillian Mackay.
I thank the Minister for that answer, but the register is clearly not working. There's no mechanism to remove shops from the register, and the Ferret discovered that the shop that went on fire in Glasgow was not even on the register. It's vital that we have a robust licensing system which is accompanied by sufficient funding to councils so their trading standards departments have the resources to crack down on bad actors. So in that light, why does the Minister believe that we do not need a licensing system done on a national level, similar to those that cover premises selling alcohol? And what funding can the government give to local authorities to ensure the legislation has teeth?
Minister.
Well, I've already indicated there are sanctions, significant sanctions with regards to non-compliance with the requirements for registering a business, fines of up to £20,000 and possible imprisonment not exceeding 6 months. And of course, it's a responsibility of local authorities to enforce to take forward any enforcement measures in that regard. I've already indicated we remain committed to considering how this process could be improved, and I take on board the point that she makes about a licensing scheme. But as I say, the enforcement powers and the sanctions already exist within the current registration system.
Brief supplementary, Pam Gosal.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Before I ask my question, I'd like to declare an interest as a former Trading Standards Officer. We are all devastated by the fire that took place on the 8th of March on Union Street in Glasgow. Yet it turns out that the shop where the fire began was not listed on the mandatory register needed to sell nicotine products, thus was selling vapes illegally. After years of cuts, there are currently only about 250 full-time equivalent trading standards officers in councils across Scotland, down by more than half since 2002. At the same time, 22 out of Scotland's 32 councils now operate with 8 or fewer trading standards officers. Not only does this put consumers at risk, but it also puts the general public at risk. So does the Minister agree that it is impossible to set laws and licences if there are no trading standard officers to enforce this law?
Minister.
Well, as I already indicated, it's the responsibility of local authorities to take forward enforcement measures in that regard, and that is their responsibility to do that, and their responsibility to provide the resources to do that. And of course, the Scottish Government has provided a real terms increase in funding to local government precisely to enable them to take forward the range of responsibilities that they have, including enforcement in the area of registration that we're talking about here.
And very brief supplementary, Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I wonder if the Minister would also consider, in light of the fire in Glasgow, looking at the planning use classes in Scotland, which allowed this particular retail unit which went on fire to switch from being a bureau de change after a period of being empty for 10 years to selling vapes without any need for a change in planning consent. It seems like an obvious opportunity to very quickly tighten the regulations up so that consent would need to be sought.
Minister.
Well, as I said, I don't know that quickly is an appropriate measure, because you need to go through a proper process to understand any changes you were choosing to make. And the member's right that the use class is fairly broad, covering as it does retail, but to start to compartmentalise that potentially takes you into a place where you're putting up unnecessary barriers for businesses. So that would need to be considered in the round. But as I say, the existing mechanism that's in place through the registration scheme requires businesses that are selling those products to be registered, and a broad range of factors can be considered in that regard.
Question number 2, Ros McCall.
To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of the impact of its budget 2026-27 on the ability for local authorities, including Perth and Kinross Council, to meet rising demands for services.
Cabinet Secretary Shona Robertson.
Presiding Officer, before I answer the question, I hope you'll indulge me just for a moment, as this is my last portfolio of questions and also my last opportunity to speak in Parliament. I'd like to take that opportunity to thank my government officials for all their support in my government role, thank all the Parliament staff for looking after us so well over the years, particularly with some very late sittings of late, and finally to thank my staff in my local office for supporting my constituency work, and last but by no means least to thank my constituents in Dundee City East, whom I've had the honour to serve for nearly 27 years. It's been my absolute privilege to do so, and to wish my colleagues who return to Parliament well, and for those not returning, the very best in whatever comes next. In response to Ros McCall, I would say that we appreciate the pressures facing local government, and that's why we're providing record funding of £15.7 billion, including £250 million of unrestricted general revenue grant and full flexibility on council tax. The vast majority of funding allocated by the Scottish Government is provided by means of a block grant. It's then for individual local authorities to allocate the total resources available to them on the basis of local needs and priorities.
Ros McCall.
Thank you, and may I be the first to wish the Cabinet Secretary all the best with her future endeavours, and I'm really glad that I'm the one that gets to ask the question. But in large rural local authorities such as Perth and Kinross, the cost of delivering service from social care to education and community provision is already significantly higher, and councils are having to make increasingly difficult decisions about what they can sustain. This year, the SNP administration in Perth and Kinross has imposed an 8.9% council tax increase, taking the average Band B bill to £1,673 a year. That rise was justified locally on the basis of rising demand and what the SNP Council itself described as insufficient funding settlement from the Scottish Government. Now, the Cabinet Secretary points to a record local government settlement in the budget, but if funding were truly sufficient, SNP-run councils like Perth and Kinross wouldn't be forced to raise council tax by 9% simply to stand still. So does the Cabinet Secretary accept that this so-called record funding is not keeping in pace with rising costs? That the reality about the choices of this budget is that there's a gap now being filled by higher council tax and leaving my constituents paying £130 a year more for less, while still facing the unreal certainty about frontline services?
Thank you, Mr McCall. That's quite lengthy. Cabinet Secretary.
Well, let me say to Ros McCall, first of all, clearly there have been various council tax rates set across the 32 local authorities and very differing rates and to very differing political administration colours. In terms of rising costs, I would acknowledge that certainly across the whole public sector we have seen rising costs. The rising costs of employer national insurance contributions, the cost of VAT, and of course the global situation at the moment will put fuel costs up for local authorities and every part of the public sector. So we are well aware of the rising costs. We have given local government a record settlement, but of course that is against the backdrop of those rising costs. We will expect local authorities to work to manage within those budgets in the same way as the rest of the public sector does. And in terms of the distribution formula, which I think Ros McCall was hinting at in terms of it being a rural local authority, that of course is a matter for COSLA to decide upon.
Question number 3, Sue Webber.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of any impact of its local government funding settlement on the condition of roads across the Lothian region in light of the City of Edinburgh Council, for example, facing an £86 million repair.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the vast majority of funding available to councils is provided by means of a block grant from the Scottish Government. It's then the responsibility of individual local authorities to manage their own budgets and to allocate the financial resources available to them, including on maintenance of local roads on the basis of local needs and priorities, having first fulfilled their statutory obligations and the jointly agreed set of national and local priorities.
Sue Webber.
Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, this week's road condition figures confirm that every driver in the Lothians already knows that our roads are getting worse, not better. And the reason is straightforward, because this government has squeezed council budgets so hard that road spending is being cannibalised by statutory obligations. Audit Scotland says the roads funding shortfall will nearly double to £458 million by the end of the decade. Does the Cabinet Secretary accept that this is a direct consequence of a funding settlement that forces councils to meet SNP priorities over basic services like roads and pavement repairs?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, of course, many of those joint priorities are important to the people of Scotland, whether it's tackling child poverty or providing childcare. So these are important shared priorities that local government has with the Scottish Government. Scottish local authorities, as a consequence of the budget, have an additional £522.4 million of funding, which would not have been available had the budget bill not been passed by Parliament. As I said earlier, those resources, in addition to council tax, that is raised locally, it is for local authorities to decide how they spend that money. We are talking to COSLA and are keen to work with local government around whether or not we can find imaginative ways, given the lack of capital availability from the UK Government, which is reducing, of whether we can find imaginative ways to increase the availability of investment, whether that's in local roads or other priorities, and those discussions continue.
I've had requests from 2 members for supplementaries. I had requests from 2 members for supplementary. I got a request from 1 member for a supplementary. I'm looking at the other member whose button is now no longer pressed. No. So I would point out to Fergus Ewing that, of course, the question relates to any impact of funding on the condition of roads across the Lothian region. Mr Ewing.
Thank you very much indeed for that advice, Presiding Officer. Could I ask whether in Lothian, where the backlog is 69 million, or Highland, where it happens to be 226 million, or indeed anywhere, particularly in rural Scotland, roads and bridges are being closed because of safety? And in my patch, Neil Gordon, a farmer who has Balnan Bridge closed, after a day's work of farming, has to drive up to 100 miles. How can that be fair, Cabinet Secretary, when rural people face the end of their livelihood at the same time as we spend £226 million building new cycle lanes in cities which nobody uses?
Cabinet Secretary, for matters that were relating to the question at hand.
Well, what I would say is that the record resources we've provided to local government, whether that's in rural areas or urban areas, are then a matter for the local authority to determine in terms of the priorities. What we have done, though, we have struck a number of deals to ensure that the borrowing capacity of local authorities can work with accelerator deals to provide additional investment into communities. We have deals along those lines with many local authorities in Scotland, and we are prepared to discuss those deals with other local authorities if they are so interested.
Question number 4, Maggie Chapman.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government, in light of Audit Scotland's recent statement that local authorities will face a budget gap of nearly £1 billion by 2027, what action it is taking to provide additional support to third sector organisations that prevent and respond to rent and council tax arrears?
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government's council tax reduction scheme ensures that nobody should have to meet a council tax liability they can't afford, and we continue to promote take-up, including through working with Citizens Advice Scotland. Where arrears do occur, councils have powers to write those debts off. The budget provided councils with record funding of £15.7 billion, including £253 million of unrestricted general revenue grant. Councils have full discretion to allocate that money as they see fit, including to support third sector organisations where appropriate.
Maggie Chapman.
Thank you. And can I associate myself with Ros McCall's comments and wish the Cabinet Secretary well in whatever comes next for her. Public sector debt pushes people into and keeps people in poverty. All local authorities in the North East region have announced council tax increases well above the rate of inflation. Financial and social pressures on many constituents make it difficult for them to pay their rent. Delays in receiving social security support compound this situation. What action can the Scottish Government take to enhance community capacity and local third sector infrastructure to respond to this potential spiral of decline? And will we see reform of local government finances in the next Parliament?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Maggie Chapman will be aware of the consultation that was jointly issued with COSLA, which has now closed in terms of future of local government finance. It will be for the next Parliament to look at the options going forward. We have already set out proposition to have the increased bands at the higher end, which of course will provide additional funding to local government, which they will be able to keep. But in terms of the council tax, I should say that the council tax in Scotland, compared to if you take an average Band D property, is significantly less. I think it's about a £350 difference between a council tax Band D property in Scotland compared to England. That's not to detract from some of the rises in council tax that have been raised in the Chamber, but I think it is an important comparison of the rates that people are paying across these islands.
I now turn to questions 5 and 7, which are grouped together, and therefore I'll take any supplementaries at after both have been answered. Question number 5, Cara Mochan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of how its budget 26-27 delivers fair funding for health and social care services across the country, including in South Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary.
The 26-27 budget provides almost £22.5 billion investment in health and social care services, exceeding consequentials. NHS boards, including those in the south of Scotland, will see an increase in their baseline funding, bringing total investment to over £17.6 billion. That's a real terms uplift of 1.8% to support services, fund pay and implement agenda for change reform. We're also providing £32.8 million for NRAT parity, ensuring fairer funding and that all boards stay within 0.6% parity. The NRAT formula reflects demographic changes in excess costs.
Cara Mochan.
Thank you for that answer, Minister. The underfunding of health and social care is a systemic problem right across Scotland. Local authorities face cuts year upon year, services are being pulled and budget shortfalls have led to local communities' care packages being cut. This year, East Ayrshire Health and Social Care Partnership in my own region faced a financial overspend of over £10 million, forcing the Council to establish a health and social care emergency financial support fund to plug the funding gap as a one-off. It's not sustainable. Does the Cabinet Secretary recognise these funding gaps and the direct impact that these cuts are having on communities right here, right now?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I certainly recognise the demand and pressures that are on all of our public services, particularly given the demographic challenges that we have here that are going to increase over the course of time. So that is why we made the commitment to increase funding by 25% to social care over this Parliament. We have exceeded that by more than £500 million in 26-27, because this budget provides over £2.3 billion for social care. That's not to say there are challenges, but that is a record settlement for social care, and what we need to make sure is that the systems that we have and the delivery systems that we have at local level are working to deliver services to local people, and I'm sure that's something that the next Parliament will return to.
Question number 7, Katie Clark.
To ask the Scottish Government what steps it is taking to ensure that its budget 2026-7 adequately funds health and social care partnerships to deliver services, including social care.
Cabinet Secretary.
So I want to acknowledge the work which the health and social care partnerships have been undertaking towards balancing their budgets within the difficult financial context that we collectively face and the demographic challenges that I alluded to earlier on. That's why we're providing record funding in 26-27, provides a real terms increase in local government settlement to over £15.7 billion and almost £22.5 billion for health and social care.
Katie Clark.
Despite opposition from service users, care workers and trade unions, North Ayrshire Health and Social Care Partnership have voted to make significant cuts to social care provision, with funded care set to be restricted to those assessed as being at critical risk. These cuts are being made because the Health and Social Care Partnership is facing a deficit of around £9 million. Therefore, will the Scottish Government intervene to ensure that there is the necessary additional funding to stop these devastating cuts from coming into effect next month, given the impact that they will have?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we want to make sure that local services are retained, and that, of course, is the responsibility of local partnerships. I'm sure my colleague Neil Gray will be well aware of the issues that Katie Clark has raised. But I go back to the point I made earlier on. We have gone beyond the commitment of increasing funding by 25% for social care over the course of this Parliament by £500 million. So we have to recognise the funding that is going in to local services, in addition to the record funding to local government. I said in my previous answer that we needed to look at the local systems of delivery. I would perhaps go further than that to say perhaps we need to revisit whether the local health and social care partnerships are the right model for delivery of this critical service across Scotland.
I have a number of requests for supplementaries. I'd be keen to accommodate all, but I need succinct questions and answers to match. Supplementary from Brian Wiswell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As we've heard, East Ayrshire faces a staggering £10 million health and social care budget gap next year. To mitigate this, the Council will be forced into management actions, including reducing care home capacity and re-evaluating care packages to find £5.6 million in savings. While East Ayrshire currently boasts low community assessment waits, hospital discharge delays have already doubled to 64 days. So, with the NHS Ayrshire now at stage 4 intervention, does the Cabinet Secretary truly believe this budget is fair when it forces local authorities to choose between financial insolvency and cutting the very frontline care that prevents our local health boards from total collapse?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I have set out that this budget provides a real terms increase to local government of £15.7 billion and almost £22.5 billion for health and social care. If there are people in this chamber that think that that is inadequate, then they need to tell us by how much and where the money is going to come from. I did not hear that through the course of the budget bill. So it is easy to come and demand more money without saying where that money should come from. I think there is a question of whether the money that is in the system is working as effectively as it could, and that would be my suggestion and request to the next Parliament, that we look at whether the local systems and the resources within them are working in the way that they were intended.
Brief supplementary for Chowdhury.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. With NHS Lothian and local social care services under real pressure from staff shortages and rising demands, can the Cabinet Secretary set out how this budget helps us move towards properly resourced, publicly delivered care, rather than continually relying upon overstretched staff and the private sector to fill the gaps?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the budget provides record funding for both local government and for health. In fact, we have consistently now gone beyond the health resource consequentials that we get from the UK Government and have consistently provided more money into the NHS. I've also said that the budget provides over £2.3 billion for social care. That exceeds our commitment to increase funding by 25% over this Parliament by more than £500 million. So record resources are going into both of those systems. I just pose the question, I think, as I said, for the next Parliament to look at whether the resources within that system are being spent in the most effective way through the delivery systems that we have.
Brief supplementary, Willie Rennie.
As the Deputy First Minister leaves this Parliament, can I wish her well for the future and thank her for her public service over a couple of decades. But as the Chamber yesterday was divided on Liam MacArthur's bill on assisted dying, it was absolutely united on palliative care, and we need to have a step change. So what new will the Finance Secretary tell us today to show that that will of this Parliament is now respected by this Government?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I first of all thank Willie Rennie for his kind remarks, though it does make me feel rather old, I have to say, when you talk about a couple of decades. But he raises a very, very important point, and I do think that there is a need for us to look clearly, as Parliament was of one voice last night, around the funding for palliative care, and I think there's already been an indication from the First Minister that that is something that will be looked at. I do know that many within the palliative care sector hold on very deeply and powerfully to their independence in terms of the provision that they provide. So we need to bear that in mind when we come to look at the future funding of palliative care. I suspect that is going to be something that will no doubt find its way into manifesto developments, but also will be a key priority for the next Parliament when it reconvenes.
And brief supplementary, Emma Rodd.
Thank you. The SNP's budget provides welcome investment in Scotland's primary care service. Can the Cabinet Secretary say any more about how the investment in new walk-in centres will beat the ATM rush and increase access to primary care? And does she agree that Labour members should be welcoming this ambitious move instead of opposing it for opposition's sake?
Matters within the Cabinet Secretary's responsibility. Cabinet Secretary.
Yeah, I think that everyone should welcome the increased investment in primary care. We have a £531 million 3-year funding deal for general practice to recruit more GPs and improve access. And, of course, as Emma Roddick referred to, £36 million for new walk-in GP services in communities across Scotland. I think that can only help to ease pressure at peak times, including the early morning surge for appointments, and I would have thought that is something that would be welcomed across the Chamber.
Question number 6, Michael Matheson.
To ask the Scottish Government what steps it is taking to support local authorities, including Falkirk Council, to deliver vital services, including those aimed at reducing child poverty.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, local government has a key role to play in driving forward progress on child poverty, including in enabling the delivery of whole family support, which of course breaks the cycle of poverty. That's why the 2026-27 Scottish Budget provides a further real terms increase to the local government settlement, and it includes making £90 million available for devolved employability services next year, and continuing to invest over £1 billion in funded childcare and investing to make free school meals available to over 350,000 pupils.
Michael Matheson.
Can I, like others, wish Shona Robertson well as she departs Parliament, having served in Parliament with her over the last 27 years. I hope that doesn't make her feel old. It has been a real pleasure, and she leaves with my very best wishes for the future. Local authorities, of course, have an important role to play in supporting the Government's national work in tackling child poverty. And Falkirk Council has recently expanded its family inclusion teams in order to help to support its strategy in tackling child poverty. That's been enabled because of flexibilities that are being provided for in this year's budget, and also undirected funding which is being provided for in this year's budget. Can I therefore ask the Cabinet Secretary what discussions are taking place with local government and COSLA to look at how flexibilities could be provided to local authorities through their budgets in order to support them in targeting issues such as child poverty?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I start by also wishing Michael Matheson well after his many years in Parliament and obviously his time in government and wish him well for the future. The flexibility that Michael Matheson refers to is really important, and in addition to the additional money that's going to local government, there is also additional flexibility, the baselining of funds, the removal of further ring fencing, which gives local government much of that flexibility, and that's why it's important to do that in order to help local government to align the priorities that we share along the same lines. So for the tackling of child poverty is one of the most critical shared priorities that we have with local government, and I'm confident that Falkirk Council with their family inclusion teams are setting out a direction of travel which will help to make sure that they can tackle poverty within their local area.
I can squeeze in question number 8. I need succinct questions and answers to match. Neil Bibby.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to council tax increases approved by local authorities across Scotland for 2026-27.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, council tax is a local tax which is set and administered by individual councils who have had full flexibility in setting their rates for 2026-27, a key ask of COSLA. The Scottish Government has been clear that record funding of almost £15.7 billion for the local government settlement has been important, which is an increase of over £650 million on the previous budgeted settlement.
Neil Bibby.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Earlier this month, SNP run Renfrewshire Council announced it would increase council tax by 7.5%. That's after a record 9.5% increase last year. Yet before councils passed their budgets, the First Minister said that council tax rises of 3% would be reasonable. The Cabinet Secretary said it is a local tax, but it's of course also the unfair council tax which the SNP promised to scrap in 2007. Since then we've seen council tax bills go up, services being cut and councils being underfunded. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, does she or her government regret breaking its promise to scrap the unfair council tax in 2007?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, of course, we wanted to scrap the council tax, but we didn't get a majority in this place to do so. And what we need to do, bluntly, is to try to reach some political consensus on what replaces the council tax. And at the moment, that political consensus does not exist. In fact, even modest changes like the additional bans at the higher end have been opposed by Labour members like Daniel Johnson for whatever reason, even though the Labour government in Westminster has done exactly the same thing. So it shows that there is a need to get beyond some of that dispute into trying to find political consensus. And I would just end by making the point again that there is a huge difference between the rates between Scotland and England in terms of the council tax. The average council tax bill in Scotland is £344 less than the average bill in England in 2025-26. So for all of the talk of increases, council taxpayers in Scotland continue on average to pay less than they would south of the border.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes portfolio questions on finance and local government. There will be a very short pause before we move on to the next item of business. Thank you.